Okay, recording. Share the screen. It's a real privilege to have a very lovely gentleman volunteer for another crazy session of Composer Sessions. Mr. Christopher Priest, welcome aboard, sir. How are you?
Thank you. Very well. Nice to be on this, and thank you for reaching out to me.
No, your name came up on the list of interesting people in the Salvation Army world who have crossed the bridge between vocal and brass compositions, and it was very interesting because the name had come up, and I thought, well, that's an interesting name. And I'd played A Marvelous Wonder a little while ago, but the vocal things I hadn't really tapped into because vocal was not a big thing with me. But when I had the opportunity to talk to someone who's got a vocal output, it's an interest to listen to some new music. So it was a very good blessing this afternoon to hear some of your songs. But I'd like to go right back to where it started. Do you come from a musical family? Do you have a musical heritage? What's your musical credential background, so to speak?
My parents were corps officers
Okay.
for most of their careers. So I'm the third of three children. So by the time I came into the world, my mum and dad were stationed at some pretty large corps, and my mother was a very fine accompanist and pianist. In fact, she told me one day that if she had not decided to go into training, or rather, if the Lord had not called her, I guess, then she was going to be a concert pianist. That was her ambition, or a church organist. She just loved playing a pipe organ. On my dad's side, my dad was kind of what I would term an amateur musician. He was one of five brothers who all went to the corps. In fact, they went to Woodland Citadel, and Eric Ball was in the YP band with my dad, and had some very strong training there. My two siblings, my sister is a very fine singer, not soloist per se, but certainly has sung some notable amateur choirs. My brother became a college music professor and was a very fine trombone player. And so I kind of, followed that trend. And so I really didn't have any choice, but I was blessed to have that kind of breeding, if you will, in me with good sense of rhythm and appreciation for melody and harmony.
Yeah. So when did you just sort of discover that either vocal composition, I don't know which comes first with you, the chance to sort of vocalize lyrics or to do a brass ensemble, outside of the family sing-song, notes on paper that other people could translate and read in a proper manner. When was the first time you felt that was a practicality rather than just jolling around at home in the on the Sunday evening kind of thing?
Yeah, that is a great question. That debate is ongoing, really. What comes first, the lyrics or the music? I've done it both ways. I've written music and sent it to some very good colleagues of mine who are established lyricists. I've also obtained lyrics and read through them and sensed the meter and everything else, and then kind of created from that the song. The melody usually is what comes first, well, not usually, always, and then I hear the accompaniment, the harmonies based on that and the rhythm.
Yeah.
So, when I first started to write, admittedly, I sat at a piano and literally carved out a melody. But that didn't last for long because then I found that I could actually picture it in my mind. I could actually hear it in my head. And that was something I was always kind of gifted with. I could improvise. When I started to play brass instruments. And I always remember as well, as a kid, my mother was always putting me on programs, youth programs and home league things when I was like 7 or 8. And they bought me a wooden xylophone. It was about 3.5 octaves, if that's such a beast. And I just learned to play it. And I get the Gems for Songsters out, and I've literally learned all those songs. And my mother would accompany me, and I would play away without looking at the notes, because once I read something through, I could picture it in my mind and be able to play it on an instrument.
So, when was it sort of the first time you presented a composition of your own, whether it be a little brass arrangement or a song, to a YP band or a singing company outside of your own house?
Probably just before I got married. This would be the late 60s, around 1970. The corps that I was at, I was asked to be the assistant singing company leader. And I thought, wouldn't it be novel if I wrote something for that group? It happened to be a very fine singing company, probably 40 strong, nearly all girls. Mm-hmm. And I was, 19 then, and I crafted a song on the words, "A little ship was on the sea." And I wanted to give it a kind of a maritime lilt to it, if you will. Imagining that this ship was on the sea, it was a pretty sight, the waves came up, all that stuff. So I kind of painted a picture with it, and it was years before it got published, but it did eventually get published. But this singing company took it as their own and always wanted to sing it, not because it was any good particularly, but I think because it was theirs,
Yes.
And I've tended to do that. I've tended to write either for an occasion or for a specific group, rather than just saying, "Oh, I think I'll write this today." There's always been a goal in mind.
So would that mean that most of your works are commission based rather than the odd thing where you've had an idea out walking, or you're in the in the neighborhood?
Well, yeah. I would say a mixture of both. Okay. There was a time, and this is a long time ago now, where I would literally wake up in the middle of the night with a melody in my mind that I had to craft, and I would literally grab some manuscript and scribble it down. And then the next day I'd look at it and I'd think, goodness me, where did that come from, kind of thing. But also the pressure, if you will, of an occasion or a particular situation where I had to write something, that kind of spurred me on. I've always been better working under pressure on nearly everything I do, rather than just singing, as I say, sitting back and thinking, "Oh, I think I write a march." That doesn't come to me as easily. Or
there has to be that dynamic that someone says we need a march and we're going to need it for X, and that's that incentive. Yeah. If I don't deliver, they're going to be let down because they can't ask 6 different people. They've come to you and said, "We like you, we like your style, and we think that your ability to write a tune would be, we like doing it."
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I can tell you that I really didn't venture into writing for brass until many, many years later, because I didn't think I could. Being a player and being in groups that I was associated with, I got to play under some amazing conductors and composers. And wow, that was well out of my league. Writing a singing company song, if you will, was my kind of limit, if you will. But having said that, soon after we moved here to the States, which was 1991, I was the guest at a music camp up in the Central Territory, up in the Great Lakes area, and fine group of kids, and they challenged me one rehearsal. They said, "Could you write us a march?" Now, please don't think I went in and said, "Hey, I write music to order." If I didn't say anything about that, but for some reason, I think they wanted some originality. So for the next 48 hours, I don't think I slept much. I literally wrote a march, and that was published as Echo Grove,
Okay, yeah.
which is the name of the camp. The next year, I'm back in our territory here in North Carolina at their music camp, and they got to hear. Maybe someone had read the score notes that I'd written Echo Grove for them, and they said, "No, we expect you to write for us." So I wrote A Marvelous Wonder.
Yeah.
So nearly all my brass stuff has been under those circumstances,
Yeah.
written to order. Hence, most of it being in the Unity series.
Yeah. I mean, Echo Grove is a Triumph series, but
It is.
But I mean, you've got three. I mean, on the credited list, as I shall call it, you start off with Purpose Firm in 1991, but you've also got a couple of selections with Foundations and Songs from the Treetops. So, what is the foundation of Foundations?
Foundations.
Unity Series
I
1995, apparently.
I really should have done some homework there, shouldn't I? I was working at HQ during the 80s. In fact, I was heading up marketing for SP&S, which meant I worked with music editorial a lot, and had a long conversation with Ray Bose one day, and he encouraged me to start writing for brass. So going back then, even further now than that music camp, I guess I can say that he's the one that said, you write some pretty good songs. Why don't you write something for brass? And I think that's how Foundations saw its place. It took a while to get published, which in those days everything did, because they had such a backlog of stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
But
obviously, the history of the songs and the writing of the pieces doesn't reflect the publication, because you can write something on 20 years later. Oh, it's been published, and I wrote that for the YP band, for our core anniversary kind of thing.
So Foundations was probably a good example of literally, I'm going to write something for Unity series, because at that time he told me, Ray Bose, that they really needed some more melodic writing, if you will. Mm-hmm. There are lots of hymn tune arrangements and more sacred works that they had plenty of, but they wanted bright stuff. They wanted selections which smaller bands could play. So I kind of had a stab at it, and my style, as I say, is to start with melody and then produce the harmony. Writing for Unity series lends itself to that, because you're writing in those four parts, basically, and that's how all that worked out.
Yeah, I'm guessing that when you started out, you were a pen and paper guy, because obviously the proliferation of computer software, Sibelius, whatever, didn't obviously come till later. Although I would guess there was kind of embryonic forms of very basic plinkety plonk, but. Is it still the case of, you use a pen and paper now, or is it a case of you can go straight to your computer and just get the harmony in there and then jigger about with it? What's the process for you?
Well, actually, I became technicized, if that's the right word, soon after moving here to the States in 91.
Oh, there's a surprise.
Yeah. I mean, the move here was to work in the music department and to help them publish and market music, which is what I did for 7 years. And the music editor then was James Curnow, who's become a very, very close friend.
Yeah.
And an amazing mentor to me, and an encourager for me to write. And he said, now I expect you to write a lot of stuff, because we were getting out of the American Instrumental Ensemble Series, which is the kind of flagship that we have here,
Yeah.
which I was producing, going into some choral stuff. And I think, you know, I'm just saying this because I naturally said, can't we start publishing music for kids and for adults? And they'd already had it in their planning to produce an SAB series, a 3-part series for smaller songster groups who have an abundance of ladies but very few guys, and they're all baritones. So, you know, and in the American choral world, SAB is very popular, particularly in churches. And so we launched the Sing Praise series and the Children's Praise series. And I became very much involved in that. And most of my published works are actually in those series, where I was literally writing for a publication. So it kind of turned on its head my original start to becoming more prolific in that sense. And you know,
so when you start, and you know you've got this deadline, do you have to sort of put yourself into a musicless environment and have the radio off and the TV off and turn Spotify and YouTube and sort of concentrate on what needs to be done? Or do you work better? What's the process for you to sort of get down and put something on manuscript and get it into the computer so you meet the deadline and the need is fulfilled?
Yeah, I mean, it is a very heavy discipline. Another mentor of mine, Leslie Conlon, taught me that because I admired the way that he wrote, and he gave me a lot of help in that regard. Brian Bowen was very influential, and I'm not sure if that's a question coming up. I certainly want to pay tribute to his help with me, but let's go back to the task. I do need to be in solitude, yes. I can't have any other distraction and still find that, because I have to give 100% to it, particularly when I'm beyond that melodic stage. Really, the melody is the easy part, to be honest, comparatively speaking. I mean, it just doesn't come because you're never satisfied with what you get. You always want to improve it. But then when that's solidified, then you can hear the accompaniment. And I never use the piano because I don't play the piano. I mean, I can play Teach Me How to Lovely and get through it very slowly, but I'm not a pianist. So I don't use the piano to write. And I admire people who can do that. So I literally hear it and then put it into the system, whether it's handwritten as it used to be, or whether it's now computerized.
So do you have the constraints of the series that you're writing for in your mind, or does that, you know, because you say obviously you have to fulfill, I don't like to use the word quota, but there's obviously a lot of titles that have to be in the publishing list for a particular month or a part of the year. But outside that, if you're doing a commission or something, then you've obviously there's a limit to, if you're writing for the Southern Territorial songsters or whatever, you know the voices, you know the numbers, you know the technical break. It's a different kettle of fish, to use a British term. How much? Yeah, yeah, I know you do. How much of that is that helpful and hinders from writing for the band journals, where you've got so many players and it's a fixed thing, to writing for a particular songster brigade?
Well, that's another great question, Morgan. You really come out with some great questions, don't you? It is literally, as you say, writing to order. Go back to A Little Ship all those years ago. That was kids singing, and therefore it's pretty cut and dried. You know, it's enthusiastic singing, meaningful singing. whereas something more involved. Um, and I'll go back to when I was a teenager, still living with my parents. And one Sunday afternoon, I crafted what became the solo Wonderful Healer, which I know some people have sung and heard. It was published back in musical Salvationist. I can't remember.
1978 October.
Oh gosh, you've got it at your fingertips.
I have got it at my fingertips, yes.
Well, that was written. That's one of my first compositions. And
Unfortunately,
I literally
can't find the recordings. I can't guess.
well, but the lyrics, the original lyrics to it, were something that, in fact, my girlfriend wrote for me, who later became my wife, because we were writing a musical together, and that's another subject that maybe we'll get to. But then I was living in Bristol. I went to the Bristol Eastern Chord. I was practicing songfully there for 8 years. And Janet Bryant, who a very fine, that's Martin Bryant's sister-in-law, very fine contralto. She asked me for a solo, and that particular solo would work for her because of her range. But I dropped it about a third in pitch, made it very rich and very kind of dark in the sense of the timbre of the voice. And then I went about looking for some more well-known words than the words that my wife had written for this musical. And went through the songbook, which in those days I did a lot, looking for new lyrics or being able to update old lyrics to new arrangements. And found Lord Here Today, Wonderful Healer. And with a little bit of tweaking, it worked. And it kind of hit, and several people have sung it. I have done it with the Southern Territorial Songsters when I led them, with another fine contralto. And Andrew Justice, who was at Bristol Eastern at the time, heard Janet Bryant sing that. And years later, after we moved here, he called me and said, Chris, I've been asked to record an album of solos. He said, I've always admired this song. Is there any chance you could write it for me? So I did, and it's on his album. And that was very special to him. That's probably the most ambitious band piece I've ever written. I don't think it ever got published because I don't think I ever gave it to them. I think I just
it's not, no. Only the pieces you've mentioned I can trace a publisher so far. But it's always interesting because, I mean, sometimes you get a lot of soloists and vocalists who, I think Peter Graham is very good at this, will take a lot of the Joy Webb compositions and do band arrangements. So does it ever cross your path that people say, I'd love to have that as a cornet solo for the YP band, because we used to sing that in a singing company, and to sort of bandify it and say, could you just sort of arrange it for a simple thing? I mean, you said you read the trumpet.
Right, I haven't had anyone ask me, but I did take a vocal piece which was published. It's the old benediction out in songbook. Gosh, can't think of the title now. And I did it for a music camp in the UK. In fact, the Bristol Division music camp that was then, music school, and I had the whole of the music school sing it, and I did a very kind of upbeat arrangement. It got published in the musical Salvationist, or maybe it was Sing to the Lord by then. But again, the band arrangement, I have it, but I've never sent it in, I don't believe. So, but perhaps I need to. Perhaps this recording is spurring me to do this stuff. You know?
Maybe. So when you were starting out doing vocal arrangements, I mean, you've alluded to Leslie Condon, James Kernow. Who were the other people that sort of you crossed paths with and were really kind of the mentors musically to help you shape and to guide you and sort of give you that nudge when you needed it?
My first music school was, I believe, 1963, Sunbury Court, the Junior National School of Music. In fact, it was the first of its kind. I was there, and I think several others who've become well-known musicians. Keith Griffin was there, composer. We were all like young kids. I was 12. My parents were stationed in St Helier, Jersey then, so I flew all by myself
Wow.
to London. Somebody who they knew picked me up, put me up for the night, and put me on a bus to Kingston. Then I got another bus to Sunbury and arrived. And that's when I heard people like George Mallion, Brian Bowen, Leslie Condon, you know, who were all instructors there. Stanley Thomas from Southsea.
Yeah.
They were all names that I heard of, but I'd never met them. And if you'll permit me to share the audition with Leslie Condon, this is how we became pretty close. I hadn't long been playing trombone, and the deputy bandmaster in St Helier used to make his own slide oil. I have no clue what it was made of, but paraffin was certainly one of the strong elements. And so I march into the library there at Sunbury, and there's Captain Condon, who I didn't know was Captain Condon then, until he said who he was. And I played my audition, and I realized that I needed some more oil on my slide. And you put it on with a brush in those days, a little stopper thing, you know? Mm-hmm. And he said,
"What's that? Your word for it? I don't have mine.
What's that smell?" And I went all red with embarrassment and held up the slide on. He thought it was hilarious that it was made of paraffin. But anyway, from then on, he and I, you know, whenever we got together, he was such a huge influence on me. And I started to admire his writing, and he encouraged me to start writing as well. But Brian Bowen is the main influence. Brian was the bandmaster at Staines at that time in 1963. He was very young, in his early 20s, and in 1965, my parents got marching orders from St Helier, and they came in telegrams then, back in those days.
Yeah.
And we're sat at the breakfast table, and the telegram arrives, and my mother says, "This in here is where we are going," because we were under farewell orders. And she said, "Where would you like to go?" And I said, "Staines," because of Brian Bowen, right? I didn't know anything else about Staines. She opens it, and she looks at me in a gasp. She said, "We're going to Staines." And so my parents were the corps officers there for 3 years, 65, which was our centenary year, up to 68. A huge, and a very important part of my musical and Salvationist upbringing during that time. To be cultured in that very fine core of music making. They had a songster brigade of nearly 100. In fact, I was 99 on the songster roll. I took very great pride in that. I felt I was going to be the lost sheep, you know. And then I eventually also went into the band. But Brian would give me music lessons. My mother asked him and paid him, and I would have a weekly music lesson with him. And he encouraged me. He took me through all the rules of harmony and would give me homework. And he encouraged me because he could see that I had the talent. This is prior to me even starting to write anything. But he encouraged me to start writing, and I wrote my first Sing Company song, which I think was published in 70, For All I Care, I think it's called. And that was a very big achievement for me. So yeah, Les, Brian, of course, Norman Bearcroft, and how sad we are to hear about the news of his promotion to glory today. A huge loss to the Army music world. What a great encourager he was. I'm thinking back to Tilney Hall music camps, music schools, and all the things that went on, and his creativity and his encouragement of young musicians. And then latterly coming here to the States, I must share this, Maureen. I realize time's going.
No.
It was 1990, and I'm sorry, it was 1989. The ISB, I was in the ISB for the whole of the 80s. And we toured the USA in May of that year, 1989. And Richard Holtz, who was the music secretary here, and I had worked together on a lot of the business side of that tour because I was responsible for recordings and some of the band's functioning. And so we were sat together on a lot of planes and a lot of buses. And he was very interested in what I did back in London. And one day he just turned to me and he said, I really could do with someone like you here to help me publish music. And I said, yeah, okay, let's talk about it. And here I am, 30 years later. But he invited me back to the Territorial Music Institute, which is equivalent of what was the National Music School in the UK. And I always remember this because it's made such an impact. It was a beautiful camp up in the Georgia mountains. And I went to the first rehearsal and I played bass trombone and I sat there. Bill Broughton, who was the guest, was conducting the band. To my left was Stephen Buller on the end of the trombone section.
Wow.
And behind me was Jim Curnow playing the bass drum. I had to pinch myself. I really did. Because there were three huge names who had impact on me. Stephen Buller just started to write, Jim, and Bill Hines, of course. And then Bill, of course, his trombone playing and some of the stuff that he'd written. So to have all three of them, and all three of them were so nice and friendly and encouraging, and I mean, we're all still friends now. So I mean, it's just amazing how all that worked out.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I remember years ago I was told something, and I realised I was in the band, and I had absolutely no idea. I was at Butlins in the late 1980s when it was at Skegness, and Len Valentine, I think, was conducting the camp band, and we had this band practice, and this old gentleman just wandered in. We played this march. I didn't know the march. I just sheet read the music. I was barely probably 12 years old, and I was just following the beat. And sometime later, a story was. I said, I was there. He said, do you know what you played? I said, I've got no idea. It was Harlesden. Do you know who conducted it? It was Ray Bowes. Who's Ray Bowes? I had no idea. You were in a Salvation Army band playing Harlesden under Ray Bowes, and you didn't know it? I said, come to think of it, at 12 years old, the only people I knew was Eric Ball, Norman Beercroft, and Leslie Condon, because my bandmaster had more or less grown up in national service with Les and had been to Fakenham and knew the family. So there was that connection. But apart from that, I said, Ray Stedman Allen, Brian Bowen, Bill Hines, hadn't got a clue. They just didn't mean anything. And it wasn't later I realised I'd had this incredible opportunity. I wish I'd have sort of, Colonel Bowes, what a delight.
Yeah. I mean, you do kind of take it for granted as well. I mean, the majority of the time that I was in the ISB, first of all, it was Bernard Adams, who I just revered for his style and the way that he got the band to play. And then Ray, and then Ron Redhead came along. But Ray particularly, it was just such a character, and I could keep you here for days giving you ISB stories, especially when we went on tour and things, the things that happened.
I know band tours can be legendary experiences.
I always thought I ought to write a book, really,
Come on, go, please. I want a first edition.
Well, there may be some things that could get the editors, oh no, we can't talk about that.
But I always think they're true stories.
Yeah, they are.
As long as you're not sort of libeling people and trying to, as an old comedian wants it in the best possible taste.
Yes.
It's kind of. I think if you're doing it true and honest, and you're not setting out to be malicious,
right.
It's okay. But I leave that up to your judgment.
Well, back in the 80s, and that was my long period. It was almost 10 years. So much happened during that decade with that band, and 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 some of the characters that were in it. I mean, Gordon Ramsay, who's my billet partner, and and Paul Graham, Stephen Pearson, all those people, Malcolm Quinn. I mean, for goodness sake, there, there was never a dry eye. I
Mm.
mean, things that happened that the audience would never see or hear or know about, that to us was just something hilarious. That going back on the bus that night, we would roar with laughter and say, how did that happen? But it did.
How did you get involved? Yeah, obviously you have to audition for the ISB to prove your mettle. But
Right.
how did you sort of get involved in it to begin with? Did someone phone you up and say, "Look, it's possible there's a position coming up. Would you be interested?" Or were you just sort of lodging in the right place and instrument, sit down, get playing? How did it happen for you?
Well, I had two spells. The first one was in '68. I was 17, and I'm told that I was one of the youngest ever to come in. Scared out of my mind. I was at Staines, as I'd said, and really Brian kind of put that for me, made that arrangement where they needed a second first trombone. So I sat next to Gordon Hill, which was great. He taught me so much. And then I had Cyril Brisley this side.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever remember Cyril, what
I know
a
the name.
player, and Arthur Rolls,
Mm.
and Gordon Young's on bass trombone. I mean, it was an amazing trombone section. One quick story about Bernard Adams. I think it was my third or fourth rehearsal. And I can't remember the piece. It might have been The Present Age, something like that, because it had just come out or just been made available. I was watching him. I was watching Bernard Adams. I just admired his conducting style, and I'd missed my cue. And I'm just. Someone said that my jaw was dropped, and I was kind of wide-eyed. And he stopped the band. And those who know Bernard will know how he would react to something like that. He slowly looked to the right and glared at me. And he had an amazing way of communication. He said, "Is there a problem?" Now, the band in those days were ruthless. They were always looking out for something that maybe wasn't right,
Mm-hmm.
and making sure that you fitted into the standard. And so all eyes were on me. I was as red as a beetroot. And I said, "No, sir, I'm very sorry." Picked up my trombone and started to play when he brought the band in. I told him years and years later, after he'd retired, I said, "Do you remember saying that?" He said, "Do you know?" He said, "I think I do." And he said, "You never did explain, did you?" And I just said that. I said, "Here's my reasoning. I was just caught by your interpretation and the way that you led the band and conducted, that I was lost in that moment, and he kind of rolled his eyes to say, "What?"
Just get on with it, boy.
Yeah. But all these people were such strong influences on my life, and on my salvationism and my musicality.
Mm.
And I'm just very conscious of how important it is to share that with others. I mean, if you have the means of influencing a young life, then do so.
Yeah. It was very interesting when I was listening, because I had the benefit of being in an empty theatre this afternoon, so my phone could play out rather loud without having to interrupt anyone. And
Right.
I think what struck me was, I think I had a Joyful News praise,
Uh-huh.
which I really love, because I always like to hear "Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven" is one of my favourite sets of lyrics.
Right.
Sing to the Lord. But the melodic structure, you're not scared of testing the brigade that gets it. It's kind of, if I'm going to throw a firework in there, it's
Right.
for a good reason. It's not just for the sake of going. It's structured. It's
Right.
sensible. Is that something that sort of comes naturally to you, or
Well,
just a case of what you're writing and how you're writing it at the time?
yeah, again, I think it goes back to your great question earlier on. When you are writing to order, are you thinking about the group? I mean, I was very blessed when soon after we got here in '91 to have an opportunity to put together the Southern Territorial Songsters, and I led them for about 11 years. Um, I wrote that for that group. I was desperately trying to find some kind of song that would, if you will, epitomize who we are and what we need to be doing, so far as being Salvationist musicians are concerned. And if anyone ever asked me, would you choose brass over choral? I'm sure that's not on your list. I would tend to lean to choral for the obvious reason, because you are singing, you are sharing the truths within the lyrics, and there's so much that you can do within that. With Praise Him, that took a little bit of time. That probably took me about 3 months to craft, because I had that basic melody in my mind, which fitted perfectly. But I think there are 4 verses of that song. Yeah, I think so. And so when it gets to verse 3, Father, like he tends and spares us where our feeble frame is over. That was such a kind of departure from the main emphasis of praise. But I started to think of, I need to do 2 things. I need to take people out of that da da da, which is so repetitive, into something different. And so the thought came to me to maybe give the men a verse. But then I thought, wait a minute, if I'm going to keep it within the confinements of the pitch that I'd already set for it, then it's going to be altos and tenors. And there's nothing better than good altos and tenors singing the same line, because you get that masculine depth with that feminine roundness of sound that in choral terms blends so well. It's like the horns and baritones, if you will, in a band. It really is so close, as opposed to soprano and bass. So that's how that came about. I want to pay tribute here to Steve Buller. I was actually at his house for some reason. I can't remember what it was. And I was showing him this. It was still in basic form, and it was in manuscript, written manuscript. And he kind of coached me a little bit with that 3rd verse. So, if there are any royalties, he should get at least 5%, I think, for that piece that he did. But one thing he did do, and this is Steve. He's so good at this. There's a line in there that says, "Dwellers all in time and space." And when you get to that word space, you hold it for like a bar. We call them measures here, by the way. And the accompaniment needs to do something. So he said, "Why don't you do this?" And he played the Star Trek theme. And it fitted. So I put it in. Lo and behold, music editorial said, "Thou shalt not covet someone else's tune." Well, there was a copyright issue there. So, but when we were singing it in the Southern Territorial Songs before it was published, I did keep that in. And the funny thing is, I don't think anyone.
There's a music where music is nicked and pinched.
Well, it is.
Ralph Pears uses, I think, Bonanza in Camp Ponderosa.
Right. Someone told me years ago there are only 3 songs in the world. Because I have a good friend, Cliff Matthews, who's the bandmaster at Gloucester. We kind of grew up together as kids, and we'd have this standing joke. Whenever he heard something new I'd written, he'd say, "That sounds like," so whatever it was, And I did have that with Ray Bowes. I can't remember the title of the song, it's in that list, but it did sound like those magnificent men in their flying machine. And he actually wrote me and said, we cannot publish this because it is too familiar with this tune. And so the crazy thing was, I was 3 offices away from him, yet he still wrote me. So I walked around there and sat down with him and kind of argued the point that, you know, well, William Booth didn't worry about that. In fact, he thought, let's put as many of those familiar things in to get people's attention. It got published.
I love the little crooks because it was a game I was playing not long ago, and I think somebody pointed out to me. I think Ivor Basanko's March Manchester USA has got the match of the day theme at the end, and you know, I mean, I was speaking. I think it was Olaf Whitman talking about Norman's wonderful march, the Amsterdam Festival March. Of course, you will appreciate, you will remember this, in the 1970s, Van der Valk was huge on the TV and everyone could know the theme tune.
That theme was great.
Which my mother wants at her funeral for some reason, because she loves Van der Valk. And you actually listen to, and he actually puts a few notes in the march. And it just seems that people say, oh, we can't use that kind of... I said, would you like me to list alphabetical or chronological, the amount of army pieces that have musical motifs that are pinched from TV shows and everything else?
Exactly. Can I just finish my story about the ISB? I left 1970 because I got a job change and moved out of London. And within a year, I was married to my wife. But through my work in 1980, late 80s, I was transferred back to London. I was actually selling very expensive cameras for a Japanese company then. And the first week that I'm back in London working, my old friend George Wilson, who was a friend from the Bristol Music School, was the janitor of IHQ. So he lived in an apartment on the top floor. And he'd said to me, knew I was coming back, and he said, if ever you need somewhere to stay, just give me a call. We've got a spare bedroom. So it was a Wednesday.
Yeah.
And I gave him a few days' notice. And he said, yeah, of course you can. So I arrived, and we're eating dinner somewhere around 5:30. And it was a spring day, and the windows were open. I could hear this band music. And I'm thinking, wow, what's that? And then it dawned on me, the ISB. You know, it's on the same floor, just around the corner, as it were. And George said, yeah, it's the ISB. I thought, if you don't mind, I'd love to go and have a listen. So I changed. So I even had my slippers on because I was staying the night. So I walked round to the band room, and I was the only visitor that night. They were getting ready for a weekend, and I sat and listened. And one or two who knew me waved and what have you. And it was Ray Bowes, and he knew who I was. So, Chris, nice to see you. They had a break. By the way, Bernard Adams never did. We never had a break. We went all the way through on a Wednesday. But they had this break. Les Common was the deputy bandmaster, came up to me and said, Chris, it's great to see you. What are you doing here? And I explained my story. I was now working back in the London area, staying here at IHQ, which explained my carpet slippers. And so, you could see his mind working. And he said, what are you doing at the weekend? And I said, well, I'll be at my call back at Bristol Eastern. He said, no, he said, we need you to come and help us out. We're going to, I can't remember, somewhere up north for the weekend. So I said, yeah, I said, just check with my wife, but I'm sure that will work. So I went on the weekend with them and then stayed in another 10 years because they had a vacancy for a bass trombone. And I happened to be in the right place at the right time. If I'd not gone to that rehearsal, it would never happened. And I would never be here in the USA now. So I've got to thank, all those that made that possible.
Yeah, I mean, looking at your list, it seems that you've a great love for ploughing the songbook for lyrics and just arranging the tunes rather than getting the Andrew Maycocks and the Keith Banks of this world to get the lyrics. And I'm not saying that hasn't happened and won't happen.
Right.
Do you have is it something that you enjoy doing, or it fits the need and you're drawn to the songbook and you thought, okay, that's what's going on in the brain? Is there a particular reason that you're a songbook hunter?
I just believed that at the time, and I think you're going back kind of in the early days more now, where I could see a set of lyrics had maybe one tune as reference. Maybe that's the reason that we never sing this song now, or it needs some updating. It needs to be contemporized to become more popular. And although that's tended to change now, I know there's a lot more originality. I did gradually build up some folks. Stephen Pearson and I have done 2 or 3. Of course, he's done a lot of songs.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of people here. Deborah Mockaby, who's an officer here. She and her husband are actually divisional commanders here in this. She was just great, and I would just give her the melody, and of course now you just send her an MP3, she gets it and is able to write something for it. But I would give her an idea of theme and what I'm thinking of, and who it's written for. But the songbook, I like many people, I think the songbook is an excellent source of inspiration, and there's still a lot that can be done there.
Yeah. Who are your guinea pigs then? If you've got a piece of music for the journals or for something, who are the people that get to try it out and sort of critique it for you and say, well, it might sound all right on Sibelius, but when we're singing it, that note don't work very well?
Well, going back before computer software, where you literally had a sheet of manuscript, it was only my head that could give me what it sounded like. And so very often I would need to give it to someone confident. Now, one name I haven't mentioned, need to, is Colonel Trevor Davis. Trevor was a cadet when I first met him at Tilney Hall. He was a sergeant at Tilney Hall. There's a great story between he and I, which will stay a secret. And please don't think it's anything against Trevor. It's very much against me of something. And don't worry, it wasn't bad. But it's Trevor was a huge influence and became a very great friend. Actually became my corps officer at Staines back in the 80s. And then, of course, became the music secretary. He was a great help to me. Sorry, the question again. I'm going off on the track.
I love you going off.
Yeah, but let's hope that the viewer does as well.
If the viewer don't like it, they can change channels. This is a chat with a composer about the stories behind the music,
right.
Inspiration. I mean, if you've had people that kind of have been forgotten about, it brings them back to life. I mean, I never thought people like Les Condon and Trevor Davis would be mentioned, because I think that's kind of yesteryear, and you're looking at the Martin Cordners and you're looking at the Bullers and Peter Graham and Bill Himes, and yet I talk to people like Sam Creamer who are going back to Sidney Cox, John Gowans, John Larson, Albert Osborne, and you're taking the songbook songs and you're taking the lyricists and trying to bring it up and to pitch it for who you're writing for. I mean, when you know that you're writing for the territorial songsters, you know the strengths and the weaknesses. And I was kind of asking that, if you've got a commission come through and you're like, okay, I'm going to try this out with the local songs brigade. It's kind of, is it all smiles? Well, Chris, that was a lovely piece of music.
Yeah, that haven't always been that way. I think your question was how do you, before the days of software, how would you hear
How do you critique your music?
That's how Trevor came in. I would very often get Trevor maybe to play it through. Edwin Allen is another one. He was a great influence on me as a writer. In fact, A Little Ship,
Yeah.
One of those first songs, he helped me so much with that song. Not necessarily this is what the chord I would put here, but more the, yeah,
Yes.
you know.
I'm losing the volume on you.
Okay.
You're going very quiet. I don't know whether you've moved away from your microphone.
No, I haven't. Everything's still the same. Is it still too faint?
You're absolutely fine now. I can hear you,
Okay.
but just a few seconds ago, it was almost a whisper.
Okay, so in answer to your question, I would find someone to play the composition through.
Yeah.
And I would always be amazed. This might sound big-headed, it's not meant to be. I would always be amazed at how it was played was how I heard it, more or less.
Yeah.
There were very few times where I'd say, oh my goodness, that's a bad chord. Yes, there were times where I would say, very often say, I can improve that. But on the whole, it would have a structure, and it would certainly have the development into something that would eventually get.
How do you control the impulse? Because obviously, if you're writing a song or you're doing a band piece or you're doing a selection, even if you're writing on commission, and there is a target date, and it's okay, we want this for the fall festival, you've still got the ability to, when do you stop the tinkering? When do you stop I can make that better, I can make that better, there comes a point you say, look, that is as good as I'm going to let it be, because if I overpaint it, it's just going to make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you, teach yourself to confine yourself to say, okay, enough's enough. If I do it more, it's going to spoil it. I don't want to over embellish it. But how do you find the line of no return kind of thing?
I think there's always an element that says that you can improve something. Always remember Len Valentine telling me that he would talk about some of his wonderful songs, and I really admire his writing. That would take so much time, and in the old days where he'd write it out, he'd constantly thrown that paper away and starting from scratch until he was really sure that it was something that he could develop. I think we're all I think every composer has that. And then you have the days when you're completely blocked, and there it is. It's half constructed. And whether some people say they're not in the mood to do it, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think this is where, if you will, I would say that this is God given, and I think it's God inspired, and I think there is that power that helps you write, particularly if it's a sacred song, because of the influence that song can have, which of course you never really know.
Yeah.
You never know. And I've always been encouraged by that, of people that have sent me an email or see me somewhere and say, hey, we've been singing this in our songs. It's a great song, and it's really good. And you kind of think, oh wow. Yeah, I guess people are singing it. It's to you, when it's done, and there it is. It could be gathering dust on a shelf, but if it has use.
Is there a title of yours that continually comes back more than any other? Or is there a wide variety of, say, two or three? Oh, we sang this, we sang this, we sang this. Or we played Echo Grove, or we blew.
Yeah, I found that the more up-tempo pieces seem to be more popular. And of course, I mean, you're all old enough to know that the whole structure of Army music has changed in that we have far more outlets.
Yeah.
You had 3 meetings on a Sunday. In the afternoon was always a concert, a festival, where the band could play festival series. It's more limited now, and looking at the journals that are published, that whole thing has changed in its style and its appeal. You were asking me just now about when you're on a deadline. Back in the mid 70s, when the Bristol Music School really got going, Um, it changed venue because the school that we were using down in Somerset couldn't accommodate us anymore. And so we had to find somewhere else. And we ended up just outside, it's gone, it's in Wiltshire anyway, a place called West Lavington, and a public school called Dorset, very notable school, because the DYS and I went on the radio to appeal for someone to help us with this. We're looking for someone to hold this music school. And the head of music or head of some subject at this school was an ex-Salvationist. And he went to his administration and said, you know, the Salvation Army would love to use it. He'd heard us on the radio, and that's how we got there. But coinciding with that, I was asked to produce every year a musical, which could be my own choosing. I had to get someone to write it, or I would write it, but I had to write the music, and so I would have maybe 6 songs, all different musical styles, and find the characters to sing them, or it would be a collective group. That was real pressure, because for 3 months, that's all I did. Is apart from my work, is every given moment I would be looking for new stuff.
Is that where the treetops came from, or is that slightly?
That is exactly where it came from. Yes.
Yeah, I can remember you saying it in the prelim.
The older Salvationists here may remember a book called Woodland Citadel, and the writer was Brigadier Bradwell Derbyshire, and I got to meet him. Quite a character. But he wrote this, and it was a Salvation Army corps in a forest. So the corps sergeant major was a jackdaw, and the corps officer was a field mouse, and songster leader would be an owl. And, you know, so you had all these characters.
Yeah, I've never heard.
So I was fascinated with it, and I actually wrote a kind of musical adaptation of the first 2 chapters of the book,
okay,
with some songs. And I was looking for songs that had kind of a rural aspect. So the birds upon the treetops sing their song.
The birds upon the tree. Yeah.
A little star peeps over the hill. I can't remember what the last one is. And so I had a band. And I don't think they dressed up in animal costumes. So I don't think they had that kind of budget. But you know, we characterized them and said, okay, this is Sergeant Major Jackdaw, and this is, you know. But I had a band play a piece in a meeting, and it was Songs of the Treetops. And I sent it in, and they published it. I think that's Unity, isn't it?
It's Unity 1992.
Okay, well, that was probably written in 76, 78, maybe somewhere around now. Certainly a little later than that.
Yeah, I think because the Unity series was relaunched because it had been running in the 50s and the 60s, I remember, and then because I remember playing the books with like Greenford, and I think there was a lovely little Unity Shepherd something by Dean Goffin that we put on Harvest. And then
Unity. Yeah, you're right. Unity was excellent in its original form, in that it was obviously for limited players, limited in number, I mean.
Yeah.
But it still was quite technically demanding, or could be. But I remember soon after getting here in the States and working on the instrumental series, Richard Phillips and I had a chat on the phone one day, because he told me that he wanted to revamp the Unity series and was interested in how we did it. Of course, here they do it in a grading system. So there's grade 1 through 4, which follows the American educational, music educational kind of template. So obviously a grade 4 is a lot more advanced. And so a lot of that music is played here by our divisional groups and some of our core bands. Because we don't have the huge bands anymore. And the good thing about that series is that you can adapt it for woodwinds. So part of my job when I first got here in the 90s, was to develop that with the church music world, which is huge over here. I mean, the Baptist church, I think they have something like 170,000 members of the music fraternity.
Yeah.
Members.
And so gospel style is very
right.
States, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of it was if a church had 2 violins, a clarinet, and a tuba, they could play that series.
Yeah.
Because once you have the 4 basic parts, and so, and to this day, it's still the same, and they're still produced in grades.
Yeah.
So that was good. That's how Unity got its revamp. But my compositions, I think, were written before that. Maybe Marvelous Wonder is in that new format.
Yeah, 2004. Because Echo Grove's Triumph series.
Echo Grove's Triumph.
Yeah. Foundations was 1995 it was published, and then jumped to A Marvelous Wonder in 2004.
Yeah, there's lots of gaps.
Yeah, but that's just relating to when the pieces are published, not when you actually originally write them.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So bearing in mind that we've got, we in the UK got this lockdown. I'm not quite sure what the lockdown is affecting you guys over there like. I know it's different.
We've been back at the office for a month now. We have to wear a mask whenever we walk around our building. I'm at territorial headquarters in Atlanta. We have to wear a mask if we interact with anyone. But my team here, there's 5 of us. I mean, we've been together all through this, so we're fine. No, I'm okay for time if you are.
No, I wasn't right. What I was going to ask was that the point of this series of chats was because we were in lockdown, and it tends to go in one or the other direction. Like you've had a lot of time to allow the compositional gene to explode and finish off a lot of things that you haven't had to, or it's gone the other way, in which you've been so focused on the family and getting the work done, you haven't had time to do the compositional bench.
Right.
I wonder which way it had gone for you.
Well,
had you managed to sort of get anything off? What would be the next piece of music that we could do?
Sadly, I've not really composed anything in probably a few years, and it's all my doing, and it's not that I don't want to do it. I get so absorbed in what I do here. I'm responsible for communications through 15 states, and we have here a fully equipped TV studio. In fact, we have 2 studios, and since the lockdown, we've been in demand. We've just done our first virtual commissioning.
Yes. It used to be a yearly thing for our family to watch the American commissionings.
That was a huge undertaking, because the actual commissioning meeting was a mixture of live and recorded. So fortunately, we're very well blessed here with resources, and we have equipment that will allow us to seamlessly put that out. It's all on YouTube, but it still has been a lot of work. And right up to the day of, we were changing scripts, and I had to have a floor manager there to cue the commissioner when to talk, and all that kind of thing. It's so totally different. So from a music point of view, I regret to say I have not really written anything in a while. The last piece I wrote was a song for our music camp, where I was asked to start a new chorus, and in the mid-range, that would be the first mixed chorus. So you go boys singing, girls singing, mixed chorus, and then above that are 2 other choruses that get more and more technical. I was the middle one, and it was named after James Anderson, because Jim was here, came out a few months after we did, and we're great friends. But he was very influential on the music here, so we called it the James Anderson Chorus. So I said I'd like to write something. I actually did an arrangement of one of his songs, but I said, I'd like to write something specifically for this group. And Deborah Mockaby, Major Mockaby, and I got together and produced it. I can't even remember the title. And I don't think I've sent it in. So no doubt Andrew Blythe, if he watches this, is going to be hounding me, or not. But that would be the last time. And again, this answers the question you asked earlier about when you write a song. This was another through setting. I've heard a lot of songs to songs in my life,
Mm-hmm.
and to have 3 or 4 verses dirged out all the same does nothing for me, even if it's a great lyric. So I believe in variety, and I believe in being creative.
Mm-hmm.
And so this particular song, again, verse 3, with a whole different track. The kids love singing it, which was encouraging. And you've got to think of that as well. These are teenagers, young adults. They don't want to sing, Travel Along in the Sunshine. They want something that has some
Why
kind
not?
of
Because
beat
it's a lovely
on it.
chorus.
And so, and I didn't necessarily produce all that they wanted, but I hope I was able to give them at least a little insight into being a little more creative. And that's always been my thought as a choral leader, as a songster leader, that I always say to the group, you've got a huge task ahead of you. You've got to communicate. You can't just stand over the book and mumble. You've really got to live the lyric.
Yeah.
Because that person listening, you have no idea what they're going through and how that line of a song could be their turning point.
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
So when you're not doing media communications and attending to the musical departments and outputs, what other interests clean your brain and help kind of settle the migraines caused by the technical letdowns and script changes and all the rest of it?
Oh yeah. Added to my job, I also look after public relations and crisis management and all the training pieces that go with that. Which is, there's always something going on within the United States with the army. There's some controversy somewhere, and so that gets some of my time. I enjoy traveling. Of course, we haven't done that in a few months now. It's been my privilege to visit every continent in the world for the Salvation Army. My last big trip was to Australia, where I was a guest there for 10 days with the Melbourne Staff Songsters, and I got to conduct the Melbourne Staff Band as well in that trombone solo, Wonderful Healer, which they enjoyed. I do have some interest. I enjoy gardening. To be honest, I just enjoy relaxing with my family.
Yeah, lovely.
And America's
So
a great
well
place
done
to live.
with, the music and it's easy to say, oh, I've got a beautiful garden, I've got 2 dogs, the grandkids are constantly coming around and mucking around in the back garden, and there is a life that you have to go to when you're not doing the 24/7 army stuff that is your bread and butter. When you take a step back and say, okay, I need to stay away from that, otherwise I'm going to go do Lally, and the friends and the family and the dog walking in the garden and the listening to the Bach concerto have to happen in order for you to be able to turn up and do Media Ministries crisis management. You've said that you have been in every corner of the globe, so I'm trying to be a very eclectic group here. Weirdest place that you've ever had, the most unusual place that you've ever had an email message from about a piece of your music being performed?
Not sure about the weirdest place. I remember a couple of years ago at our music institute, which until recently we held in Texas at our camp there, which is amazing. It's a resort, it's not a camp. I had a South American Salvationist who was attending, he was doing the leadership course, and incidentally, we offer that for prospective and beginning music leaders to come and study under Richard Holtz and Ron Holtz and others to be able to perfect their craft. But this one young man was there, and he came up to me and he said, "I've always wanted to meet you." And I said, "Oh, well, that's great. Let's chat." And he told me that a piece of music that I've written, and forgive me, I can't remember what it was now. It was a song, had been influential to him, and they translated it into Spanish. So I was quite intrigued by that, because that doesn't always work, as you know. Another language would
lyrics can change.
Later, and but he assured me that it did. It may even be praise my soul. I don't know. But I was, that kind of hit me then. That again, it's not, well, I finished that. Here it is. It's going to be published. It's the fact that God can use it from then on for what needs to happen, and it's just really a tool. It's just really part of so many other things.
Yeah. And so when you're not scouring the book looking for ideas, and do you have a favourite Salvation Army song in its own merit that you just enjoy listening to and singing to and worshipping with?
Well, I mentioned Len Valentine. I love his style of writing. When I directed songs for group, I would feature a lot of his music, moment by moment. Is one of my favourites. The way he crafted that melody and the way that the lyric falls. If we're talking about Salvation Army singing, and we talk about congregational singing, then obviously anything that Bill Hines has arranged, which really does lift you, and it gives you a new perspective. I've been to a lot of Salvation Army events, and I think back to Boundless, where we sang the Founders song, and incidentally, I was backstage at Boundless nearly all the time. I was seconded by the production company to sit with the people projecting stuff on the screens, make sure that they put the right verse up and changed it, especially in the prayer meeting, where the general would say, "Let's sing, come to my heart, Lord Jesus," and they'd be around, trying to find it.
Been there, done that.
I'd say, "Yep, put it up," because they needed someone who knew
yes,
what's going on. But I did get a chance to wander out. In fact, my wife was sat in one of the boxes, and I had a seat with her, but I seldom sat there. But I think a particular wonderful memory is on the final night, is walking around the back of the stage, coming up the other side, and the ISB were right there, and they just started playing Kingdom Triumph. Yeah. And so I leant against the side wall behind the cornet section. I got my phone out, and I recorded the closing two sections. And it's on there now. In fact, it comes up a lot. Probably come up very soon, because the 5-year anniversary about to happen, of them playing that. Just to hear Eric Ball and the connection with that event that proved that something that was written, 60 years ago?
Probably, yeah.
In the Charlton, maybe even more. It was certainly out before I started playing in senior band. That's 50-something years. It just was amazing. And I said to Steve Cobb afterwards, who again, he and I grew up together in the music camp, Steve, if you thought of that piece, that was perfect. And he said, well, I did, yeah, because of what it meant. It was just amazing to hear Lo He Comes with Clouds Descending. It kind of set the whole week so well, and that's
Kington
that.
Triumphant, published 1963.
Is it?
Yeah, Festival Series 1963. I thought it'd
Well,
be earlier than that, but
I played the senior band in '66, which was Staines. When we moved there, I was 14. I was a senior soldier, but could not play in the senior band. Brian was very strict then. Well, he was always strict, but you know what I mean, very strict. And I used to sit next to a good friend of mine, same age, went to the same school, and Brian would come up after the meeting, and we'd say to each other, "He's gonna talk to us," and of course he wouldn't. He'd walk right like that, expecting for that invitation. So he did come to me the December before I was 16 or 15, and he said, "Chris, are you interested in joining the band?" What a question! Am I? I'm on the edge of my seat. So I said, yeah, I am very much. He said, good. He said, because we start caroling tomorrow. And so I had to carol every opportunity with that band. And then the rehearsal started in January. And I couldn't play out with them until I was the right age.
yeah.
Which I think was 16 then. So I may have had to have gone a whole year of rehearsals before I could play.
Mm.
Nowadays, you've got to beg people to come and join you, to play, which is sad in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
I don't get emails, but in a lot of cases, it's so different now. But that just came to me as you said that.
I mean, what were the what have been the cultural differences that you've noticed from the UK to the US in terms of musicality and playing? Because obviously you've played in the international staff band, you've done music schools, but you've also had the US equivalent. So are there any kind of major differences that you've noticed?
I would say that the average Salvationist young person here is far better educated in music because of the school system.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a very strong music program here.
It's more deeply embedded, isn't it? So
it is. Of course, a lot of it is geared around sports. So you have what we call the high school marching band, which, and I don't want to offend any of my friends here who might be watching, but the quality of playing can be suspect because they're literally blaring out some tune over and over and over and over again. They don't have sheet music in front of them, so they've learned that. But it gives them good stamina to be able to sustain, when they're playing. Music-wise, at Salvation Army camps, I'm always amazed at the quality. And our own territorial band now has, in the last few years, brought in a lot of younger musicians who are products of that system.
Yeah.
Back in the mid-'80s, here in the South, a very resourceful divisional commander decided that he wanted to have what he called a music conservatory program, with 4 weeks. Get it now? 4 weeks of solid music instruction. They still go on now. Obviously, this year is a little different. We'd be right in the middle of it now. We have 9 divisions here, and every division does that program. Not always 4 weeks, some are 3 weeks. And it really has produced some outstanding musicians because of that intensity, where they bring in guests. My good friend Nathan Cole, who you may have heard of, he played in Corey band. He came and joined us on the team. It must be coming up to a couple of years ago now. He's in North Carolina, and last year he brought people out from the UK to instruct these kids. He's built an incredible program of music making in that division already, and there's a keenness to learn. What troubles me is at the core level. there are very few corps that have what you and I would recognize as a good Salvation Army band. Our corps at Atlanta Temple, which is the kind of the Regent Hall, if you will, of the UK, has a 30-something piece band. The neighbouring corps has a 30-piece band, but then you've got to go all the way down to Florida to places like Tampa and Clearwater, and maybe Orlando, and that's a good 400-mile drive before you get another good corps band. So there are lots of groups, there are lots of ensembles, and that's why that ensemble series was built in the first place, for our own people to be able to worship and to use brass or a combination of other instruments.
And serving a purpose.
Yeah. Now singing is different. Singing is different. I was very impressed with the quality of singing here, especially with the guys. You know, I don't know what it's like in the UK now, but a lot of male songsters are there under, I won't say under sufferance, but you know what I mean. They feel obliged or obligated to be part of the songster brigade, or maybe their wives tell them they have to. I don't know. But you know, here they take singing a little more seriously. Again, because of the education system, I believe. There are thousands of excellent choirs here in churches and in groups. And so, you know, the music level, standard education level, I believe, is very good.
I'm gonna go because I'm using up too much of your time here, and do you have a favourite Bible quote, passage of scripture that means a lot to you?
Oh gosh, there are lots. In all our ways, acknowledge Him,
and He will do it like
He will direct our paths. Certainly. I firmly believe through my life that God has led me. I always thought I'd be a music teacher when I was a kid because of my family. And then when I was at Staines, an opportunity came up to join the Horse Guards and to be a trombone player. Two of the Staines band were in the Horse Guards, and they let me know there was a vacancy on trombone. And I got very close to signing and committing. Of course, I did discover that the first 6 months of training was learning how to ride the horse. And that was something that I didn't, funny enough, I didn't really take in as, I guess that's important, isn't it? Because whenever I see them, trooping the colour or whatever, I think, gosh, how would I have done that? Control the horse and play the trombone. But that wasn't to be. But I think the Lord has guided me in so many ways. Like I told you, if I hadn't gone to that ISP rehearsal, on the off chance, because I heard them, because the window was open, I would not be sitting here now.
Yeah.
You can equate that to so many different things.
Well, like lyric, if doors should close, then other doors will open.
Exactly. I did wonder if God was calling me into full-time ministry at one point. My wife certainly wasn't interested in that, still the same way. And then it dawned on me that the Lord was calling me to work for the army. See, I think that's almost as important, because I could never have done what I've done in the army if I'd been an officer. I would have been moved to different appointments, and no doubt, hopefully, I would have done a good job, but I've been able to do so much more in all the opportunities I've had,
There was never discussed around the breakfast table when the telegram came as the officer's kid being okay to sort of, are you going to follow in your parents, the divisional youth secretary, are you going to follow in your parents' footsteps?
Yeah, I have plenty of those. My dad never talked to me about it from memory. My mother always said to me that she didn't think I'd make a good officer because I was too sensitive. She was probably right, because I do take a lot of things to heart, I'm very level-headed. I seldom get angry or annoyed, but when I do, it's not pleasant, but it's very, very rare. I'm not able to cope under pressure. So from that point of view, I guess I could have coped. But again, I go back to all the things that I've done. I mean, working at SPNS, I was there on the Music Council when we talked about moving from LPs to cassettes and then from cassettes to CDs. And I remember everyone except Brian Hilson and I arguing against going to CDs. And we kind of look at them in disbelief because the thought was that we'd be wasting our money.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do a survey. So I did a survey. I think it was in the Musician, maybe it was called then, or the Salvationist. And nearly every answer coming back about should the army have CDs was, well, once they do, I will buy a CD player. In other words, the market was waiting for us to make the move.
Yeah.
Before they would invest in a CD player.
Mm.
Back in those days, our record collection was all army.
Yeah.
That's all you did. That's all you played, which is probably how I learned so much of the repertoire. Just playing record after record.
Yeah. I've got the ones in my loft, so
right.
They're all digitized thanks to Regal Zonophone, and
right.
So you can go and listen to the all these old records, and they're all digitally available now, which I love because you can track down the recordings, and people will pick it up. And thanks to the Music Index, it's not dwelling in an archive, and you have to find an army band who might have it in their library. You can literally go on and order that solo arrangement.
Right. So one thing I'd like to say here is part of what I do here is produce twice a week a news program about the Salvation Army. It's called Salvation Army Today.
Yeah,
it goes all over the world.
Yep.
And that started in my head originally, but then I got some to help me develop it. And our most popular episode is when one of my crew and I went to London to talk about Boundless. This would be in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And Steve Cobb, no, wait a minute. It was April of 2015. That's right. We went over to make the final arrangements. And Steve and the ISB were at whatever church they record down Finchley that evening. I dropped in on Steve and I said, "Hey, is there band rehearsal?" And he said, "No, we're at the recording, but do you want to come?" And I said, "I'd love to. In fact, will you let us do an interview with you and maybe a couple of players?" And yes, I'd love that. So we did. That's our most popular episode in 8 years of publishing.
Oh, really?
And people say to me, "Why is that?" And I say, it's easy. There's such a huge band following in the army and outside that there's the natural tendency to share. With social media, the only way this works is if people share, like this interview, they share it and say, "Hey, this is Chris Priest. Do you want to see what he said?" Or, "Hey, I've never heard of this guy. Do you want to see what he says?" That's the only way it works. We're not going to get 10,000 views out of this by one episode. It has to be shared. So that said to me that there are many, many good factors still about Salvation Army banding.
Yeah, many other things we cannot understand. Busy. Oh, hang on a minute. I'm just going to resume recording. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing, this Salvation Army world, and this is why when Dean asked me to do this, I said I don't know about compositions. I don't know about C sharps. I'm a drummer. I know how to play drum music.
Right.
And he gave me a load of names, and they said, "Oh, you should go to loads of names," and that name swung to that name, and the response has been incredible. And I just blather on. It's the people like yourself, the stories, the experiences, and the names that are coming out that you wouldn't have thought would have come out. I mean, someone mentioned I think, Phil Catlin the other day.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Wow, just someone I adore, because I think he's so undervalued. Just an epic contributor to Salvation Army music, and almost forgotten about, apart from My Soul Is Full of Joy, The Devil Can't Destroy, and maybe a couple of cornet trios.
Yeah.
Someone who was mega in his time, but unlike Eric Ball, Leslie Condon, Ray Seven Allen, Stephen Buller, Peter Graham, almost forgotten about. And
Yeah.
I feel kind of guilty about that.
I had the privilege back in the 80s again, the ISB, Will Heaton came to our rehearsal. And Ray Bowes knew him, I think, when they were kids together. I'd never met him. I'd seen a picture of him. And he was probably late 60s, early 70s then. And he came for the day, spent the morning with Ray Bowes in the music editorial. And Gordon Camsey and I were invited to have lunch with them. So we sat in the SB&S restaurant, and I mean, again with Ray, everything had to be just so, and the conversation wasn't kind of relaxed. It had some tension, but it got time to go to rehearsal. So Wilfred Hinton was coming to the rehearsal, and he was going to conduct a couple of his pieces. So we get across to HQ rehearsal. We all rode in Ray's little Honda, which was an experience of itself, because Ray was a terrible driver, terrible. And we got there in one piece. And I think Ray conducted one of his later pieces. I can't remember what it was. And then Wilf came up to conduct Just As I Am. Now, to me, that was a wow moment, to actually have him, because I played that piece so many times. I've heard so many bands play it. I heard some bands crucify it, of course. but to hear it played well with the ISB and with the composer, well, the tempo, first of all, was so slow.
Yeah.
And we're looking at the corners thinking, are they going to pass out? Because it really was. Anyway, he got halfway through and he stopped the band and he kind of sat back. In those days, they used to sit on a seat on a platform, and he didn't say anything. Now, he was a little bit of a recluse. He wasn't very talkative. And so Ray Bowes kind of shooting him up, are you okay? Are you okay? And Will said, well, he said, I went to my doctor recently and I have a heart condition. And so the whole band went, what? He's going to die on that podium. Anyway, he was fine. So he had a little bit of a rest, and then we played to the end. I shall never forget that, because obviously the sensationalism of sitting in a room playing that wonderful music with a guy who got it out of his head,
Mm-hmm.
Was something I don't think I will ever forget. But it was a scary few minutes. But we're all looking at each other thinking, okay, do we call an ambulance? What do we do here?
But it must have been an epoch making thing, because being in the international staff band, you had all the, you had the whole string of composers, old and new, coming through the doors and the music. So not only would you have Seven Allen's, Ray Bowes, and
right.
sort of Ken Downey, Peter Graham would come in during the early 80s. You had established names like Charles Dove, Donald Osgood, Michael Kenyon, all these almost forgotten names from the history. That because you were in the ISB, they would come and you would at first whip at it, and you say, right, we've got to try and crack this, guys.
You mentioned Phil Catlin there. He came to an end of year rehearsal. Band has in December, it has an end of year rehearsal where it's open to all previous members. They usually put some food on and what have you, and then the band will give a little concert about current repertoire. Well, Phil Catlin was there. We didn't know he was coming. He'd come over from the States for a visit, and I guess he'd probably be in his 60s then,
Mm-hmm.
and Ray Bose is talking to him, and he comes up to the librarian and he says, "Do you think you could get a sunbeam?" Now, Capman wrote a sunbeam years and years and years and years and years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So he runs into the library and brings out the music. Of course, none of us have played that. You know, I doubt if I ever played that.
Really?
So we put it on the stand. I think it was written in like the 30s or the 40s. I mean, it was. You're going to tell me, aren't you? It's festival series. I remember that.
I've got to find a Sunbeam Air Vary Phil Catlin Festival Series 1937,
Right.
according to the memory stick anyway.
Well, in that case, he probably was more in his 80s then when he came to the rehearsal. He was old anyway. But he's conducting it. And Jordan Kamsey was sat next to me playing second trombone. And he stopped the band and he glared over at the second trombone. He said, "Change that to a G sharp." And so Jordan quickly gets his pencil out and he says, "Change what?" You know, because it wasn't specific. He just said, "Change that to a G sharp." So he worked it out. And then he made some cryptic comment about music editorial in 1937 that obviously got it wrong. Yeah, he was an interesting character.
I would love to have seen, because Andrew Blythe had, when he was a very young man in Margate, he said to me that it was towards the end of his life, and he said you'd get a grunt if something went wrong. And he just had this eclectic career in America, being the professor, I think, in Pittsburgh and all the rest of it.
Yes, he
I think,
was.
but then he just came back and retired, and
Composition or something, was it? Yeah, something like that. Well, actually, Andrew joined the band when I was in it.
Yeah. But look, I'm going to draw this to a close because I'm taking up too much of your time, and I need to find out what my sister's doing.
Right.
I just want to say thank you so much for your time and for just being kind enough to talk to us about your music, vocal composition, your mentorship, your whole musical experience. It's been fascinating to hear the stories and just hear you talk, your passion and the enthusiasm. I'm going to say a prayer, and I'm going to pray for you and for your family and so forth, and I'll switch off the recording, and then we can just, wander about as we need to. But dear Lord, it is always a huge privilege to do these interviews, and sometimes you have no idea where they're going to lead, but the essence is that we're doing this to learn more about the gifts that you have bestowed upon these incredible people who sometimes have no formal training and just learnt from listening to others and benefiting from the great mentors of the past. But all this music and the composition and the gifts and the skills come from you, Lord, and we thank you for that, and we fully recognize that. But I thank you, Lord, for Chris, and I thank you, Lord, for his music, his ministry, how it has shaped and guided his life. I pray for his family and his core folk at this time. I pray for the staff around him that have to deal in the modern day challenges of social media and technology. And it may be miles away from those musical composition beginnings, but it's all part of the life that you have designed for him. He's so willing to follow you, Lord, and just to keep on that pathway of duty and to cope with it, knowing that you are there and you're willing to give us what we need. You do not send us out unprepared. If you ask us to do a job, you equip us to do it. It means writing the music or seeking the inspiration. It is you at the center, and I thank you, Lord, that Chris has faithfully followed you, and even from his early beginnings, that you've just been very powerful in his life. He has a very true sense of the glory of God, and in some respects, Lord, the power and how that can be used and how it can be used properly and positively. I think sometimes we see people who try to abuse the wonderful gifts, but when we harness them and they work, Lord, it's a blessing and people get blessed. And I thank you, Lord, for the people that have been blessed by his music and his ministry and his worship, his Christian faith and his Christianity, and the people who interact with him and he comes into contact with, and the people who just have no idea what the name means at the top, and then, like myself, they learn about this wonderful, gifted Christian gentleman that is Christopher Priest. And I thank you, Lord, for that. I just pray your blessing and your care and your peace on him and his family at this time as they just go through this extraordinary period of COVID and all that is involved. And I just pray your strength and your guidance on him as he continues to follow you and do the job that he finds so wonderful to do, and that it just benefits so many people, and that he is a part of that, and that blessing that just comes from you, Lord. And I thank you for all of that, Lord, and for the massive myriad jigsaw puzzle that his life and his ministry and his music and his work and the technology and all that is just part of the cogs of his life. They all have to work in order and it has to flow properly. Otherwise, you know, faith is flowing like a river. It will jam up and he can come back to you and say, what's going on, Lord? I'm trying to do this. Let's find out. Let's talk about it. And you are there ready and waiting. And we thank you so much that you are always there, Lord, and that you have the right answer at the right time. So thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
I will